I know that we hear a lot of environmental themed talks. It's such a topical subject right now, but we're always hearing the same spiel about pollution, waste, and global warming. I know that it always goes right over my head. A lot of times we ignore the problems because we feel like we're not personally contributing to them. I mean, we all have our things that we do to help the environment. We make use of public transportation. We don't litter. And of course, we recycle. 97% of Canadians make use of at least one recycling program. Many use it as a way to ease their shame about their own consumption. By sorting their plastics, cans, papers, and bottles into bins, we can assure ourselves that we're not the problem, but the solution. However, even though we see the recycling system as some beacon of environmental aid, it is in fact quite ineffective. Come on, you're probably thinking. What about what we're always taught? Reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Yeah. In theory, recycling should have been the solution. All things considered, it's a great way to turn waste into a useful product. But something that we forget is that recycling is also an industry. And, like all industries, it's fueled by supply and demand, market-driven limitations, and of course, money. To give some context, the basic recycling process is comprised of 3 main steps: collecting, processing, and purchasing. Prior to collecting, we sort our recyclables until they're picked up by the truck and carted off to the plant. The processing stage varies based on type. I'll use plastic as my example. The plastics are washed, sorted, and analyzed for quality. They're then compounded or melted into pellets. Very often, foreign countries want to buy, the waste is shipped off to foreign countries that want to buy and make use of recyclables. Because of the sheer amount of waste that we produce, it is one of the largest industries in the world. But here's something to consider. We come from a society that's defined by its wastefulness. Makes sense? The average Canadian produces about 577 kilograms of waste every year. Think about everything that you throw out in a day. The wrappers on each snack, the layers of packaging on the products that you unbox, and the pieces of paper with 2 lines written on them that you crumple up and throw away. Throughout history, recycling, in its simplest form, was useful because people couldn't afford to buy new products, instead making use of what they had. Old bottles would be used for storage, and old clothing would be used to make rags. However, following the post-World War economic booms, the new access to money and resources made everybody abandon their conservative mindsets. It was only in the 60s and 70s that recycling became mainstream again. The reality of our planet's fate finally began to resonate with everybody, and environmental conservation was a hot topic. In '81, the first Canadian curbside blue bin system was implemented in Kitchener, Ontario, and proceeded to gain popularity around Canada. But here's where things started to go awry. The new recycling system meant that companies were justified in producing even more waste. It was truly an ode to our throwaway culture. It's expensive to package products, so companies opted for cheaper, easier, and more efficient packaging. Things like chip bags will be packaged in layer upon layer of foil and plastic, simply because it's easier to ship. Yogurt containers will be served in single-serving portions, because the average person loves to grab, go, and throw it away without a second thought. These companies relied on the assurance that their products would eventually be recycled. And at the time, this didn't seem to be a problem. Major countries like China, Hong Kong, and Malaysia were buying large amounts of recycled waste from the 7 most industrialized countries in the world, or the G7 countries, and using the recyclables to make their own products. countries like the US, Japan, Germany, and Canada relied on China to make use of their ever-growing amounts of recycled waste. But here comes the curveball. December 2017, China announced that they were stopping the importation of recycled materials. They decided that foreign waste could be hazardous or unsanitary, which makes sense. China's pollution is already way out of control as it is. So, in the blink of an eye, China went from importing 60% of recycled waste from G7 countries to 10% in the span of a year. This new policy was so drastic that nobody believed it would ever be implemented, let alone that quickly. Suddenly, G7 countries had nowhere to put their waste. Sure, exportations to Southeast Asia increased, but there was only so much that they could do with it. Companies were no longer making money from Chinese buyers. And without China buying, the cost of managing the average plant has tripled. The recycling system is based off of supply and demand. But with a ton of supply and very little demand, the majority of Canadian waste is being sent to landfills. Over 300 million tons of new plastic are produced annually, and only about 10% of it is being recycled. So here's a quick reality check. The recycling system isn't a beacon of environmental aid. It wasn't created to make all of our problems go away. It's a business. And a business isn't going to process our recycling out of the goodness of its heart. Without a profit or an incentive, our waste will be sent to landfills. As simple as that. Its primary advantage, helping the environment, doesn't even apply anymore. The waste from landfills, coupled with the waste from the plants from processing that much recycling, is harmful to the land, air, and water. Just look at some of these headlines from the past couple of weeks. It truly is full circle. A solution was presented, we got greedy and exploited it, the thread that was holding it together snapped, and now we have a problem on our hands. If things continue the way that they are, our future looks pretty bleak. The solution to this problem seems so far out of reach. A catastrophic amount of waste is not being processed and will not be processed. But the solution doesn't lie in building a newfangled processing plant or shipping all of our junk off to India as opposed to China. It's not about investing more in recycling programs. At its core, the solution is about us using less stuff. Out of 7 billion people on Earth, there should be a percentage willing to make a change. 7 billion people reducing their consumption should be able to make a dent in things. How does being so wasteful serve us in any way, shape, or form? Our planet should be worth more than our convenience. We know that large and greedy corporations aren't taking our environment into consideration as much as they should be. They aren't going to alter their plastic production without government intervention. The people in charge need to put bans on the production of new plastic. China had no problem implementing a drastic policy for the sake of their country and their people. But that, understandably, is a pie-in-the-sky solution. The real change will happen with us as individuals. We need to reduce our consumption. I may be bashing recycling in my talk, but there are still 2 R's left: reducing and reusing. So, stop buying plastic water bottles and foods packaged in layer upon layer of plastic wrap. Start reusing plastic bags and containers. Find something else that you can do with your recyclables. Use them to hold household items, to make crafts to drink out of again. The possibilities are endless. Just look at some of these things that people are doing with recyclables. They're using bottles to make fishing boats. They're filling bottles with cement to make refugee houses. And best of all, they're filling bottles with even more plastic waste to make eco-houses. And I thought this was cute. I saw these penguins at Disney World, and they're comprised entirely of improperly recycled materials. Even my outfit's an example of this. My shirt, one of my many Value Village purchases. When I'm done with it, I'll return it back there for somebody else to use. My jeans are from H&M, and they have a great program where you can give them your old textiles, and they'll make sure that they get put to use again. All it takes is your imagination and your ingenuity. The bottom line is that we can't rely on the recycling system or any other corporation to help us. They're not going to make our waste just disappear. It's like what Bill Nye said. We can never throw anything away because there is no away. Thank you.